More than 90% of global trade moves by sea. Over 50,000 cargo ships are sailing right now. Yet when a single container ship gets delayed, factories in Europe stop, supermarkets in Asia raise prices, and medicines in Africa arrive weeks late. In recent years, one stuck vessel has been enough to freeze billions of dollars in trade. How can a system this big have no margin for error? Why does global trade keep moving, but normal people pay more every time it slows? And who actually decides which goods move first when everything can't? It usually starts small. A port runs a little late. A berth window is missed. Paperwork sits in a queue longer than planned. Nothing looks broken. Ships are still sailing. Cranes are still moving. On dashboards, the numbers are acceptable. Then the delays spread. A factory in Germany pauses a line because one electronic component doesn't arrive. In Southeast Asia, exporters watch containers stack up inland while freight rates jump overnight. In the US, retailers quietly cut promotions as inventory forecasts break. In parts of Africa, medicine shipments arrive weeks late, not because supply vanished, but because access slipped down the priority list. When shipping slowed globally, freight rates on some routes didn't rise by a few percent. They multiplied. A container that once cost a few $1,000s to move suddenly cost several times more. Big companies paid and kept moving. Smaller ones waited. Some never reopened. No single decision caused this. No law was broken. Each delay followed protocol. Each adjustment made sense on its own. But together, they removed the system's last buffer. Time disappeared first. Then options. Then leverage. By the time consumers noticed higher prices and empty shelves, the real decisions were already weeks old, buried in schedules, contracts, and routing priorities they would never see. The ships never stopped. Trade never collapsed. It just became selective. So if one missed slot in one port can ripple across continents, what does that say about a system moving 90% of the world's goods with almost no room for error? And when everything can't move at once, who exactly gets to decide what waits? Global trade looks massive because it is. More than 90% of goods worldwide move by sea. Tens of thousands of cargo ships cross the oceans every day, carrying food, fuel, raw materials, and finished products that modern life depends on. One container can hold anything from electronics to grain. One ship can carry thousands of them. On paper, the system looks unstoppable. But scale doesn't mean safety. It means dependence. Most of this trade doesn't spread evenly across the planet. It funnels through a limited number of routes, straits, and ports. Narrow passages connect oceans. A small group of megaports handle a disproportionate share of global volume. When everything works, this concentration keeps costs low. When it doesn't, the impact multiplies. Shipping was designed to be fast and cheap, not forgiving. Schedules are tight. Storage is minimized. Inventory is no longer kept, just in case. It's expected to arrive exactly when needed. This works until time slips. When that happens, there's nowhere for pressure to go. You can see the pattern everywhere. When ports back up, ships wait offshore burning fuel without moving cargo. When vessels wait, containers miss rail and truck connections inland. When connections are missed, factories slow or stop. By the time the problem reaches consumers, it no longer looks like logistics. It looks like inflation. The numbers tell the story. When shipping capacity tightens, freight prices don't rise gently. They spike. Costs multiply. Large companies absorb the increase or pass it on. Smaller businesses don't have that option. They delay orders, shrink operations, or exit the market entirely. The system doesn't record these exits as failures. They're treated as market corrections. Different regions feel the same disruption in different ways. Export-heavy economies see goods pile up inland, unable to move. Import-dependent regions see shortages first, then price jumps. Landlocked countries feel delays more sharply because they have fewer routing alternatives. Everywhere the result looks local, but the cause is global. What makes this system hard to challenge is that it rarely breaks all at once. There's no single day when trade stops. Ships keep sailing. Ports keep operating. Shelves refill unevenly. The system survives by adjusting priorities instead of restoring balance. That adjustment is not neutral. When capacity is limited, decisions are made about what moves first. High-margin cargo gets priority. Long-term contracts are honored before spot shipments. Large clients are protected. Smaller ones wait. This isn't announced as policy. It's embedded in pricing, scheduling, and access to space. From the outside, it feels like chaos. From inside the system, it's optimization. Governments often respond after the effects become visible. Prices rise. Shortages make headlines. Task forces are formed. Explanations are offered. By then, the decisions that shape the outcome are already weeks or months old, locked into contracts and routes that can't be changed quickly. What keeps the system running is the assumption that disruptions are temporary, that the next shipment will fix it. Often, that's true. Trade recovers just enough to move forward. But each recovery leaves the system slightly more concentrated and slightly less forgiving. Over time, this changes how risk is distributed. Volatility becomes something small players absorb. Stability becomes something large players buy. Access replaces availability as the real currency of global trade. The world experiences this as higher prices, longer waits, and fewer choices. The system experiences it as feedback, as proof that efficiency still works, as long as someone else carries the cost. So the real question isn't whether global trade is large enough to handle disruption. It clearly isn't designed to. The question is why a system that moves almost everything the world consumes has so little room to absorb delay. And if scale without resilience is the rule, what happens when efficiency itself becomes the risk? Here's the paradox nobody talks about. Global shipping was built to eliminate waste. And in doing so, it eliminated its own safety net. To make trade cheaper, companies removed storage. To make it faster, they removed slack. To make it efficient, they removed backup routes, spare capacity, and idle time. Everything that didn't generate profit was labeled waste. Warehouses became liabilities. Empty ships became mistakes. Extra time became inefficiency. The result is a system that works perfectly, until it doesn't. Modern supply chains don't store goods. They schedule them. A factory doesn't keep months of parts anymore. It expects containers to arrive within a narrow window. Retailers don't stock, just in case. They restock, just in time. When that timing slips, even by days, the system has nothing to fall back on. This is why delays hit so hard. One ship waiting offshore doesn't just arrive late. It breaks a sequence. Missed port slots mean missed rail connections. Missed rail connections mean production lines slow. Slow lines mean fewer goods. Fewer goods mean higher prices. Not eventually. Immediately. The irony is that global shipping became fragile precisely because it became successful. As volumes grew, companies chased scale. Ships got bigger. Ports concentrated traffic. Routes narrowed to the most profitable corridors. What looked like efficiency was actually dependency. You can see this in how few alternatives exist. A handful of ports handle massive shares of trade. A small number of alliances control capacity on major routes. When one node slows, there's nowhere else to send the load. The system doesn't reroute smoothly. Queues. And queues don't behave like pipelines. They don't distribute pressure evenly. They compress it. Time disappears first. Then options. Then bargaining power. This is why shipping disruptions don't feel fair. Some cargo keeps moving. Some doesn't. High-margin goods ship first. Long-term contracts are honored. Spot shipments wait. Small exporters lose weeks. Large buyers lose nothing but margin. From the outside, this looks like bad luck. From inside the system, it's design. The system doesn't ask, what should move? It asks, what must move to protect profitability? Efficiency turns into a sorting mechanism. Those who can pay more, commit more volume, or guarantee future business are insulated. Those who can't absorb volatility are exposed. The system doesn't break laws to do this. It follows incentives. And because everything is optimized locally, each port, each carrier, each contract, no one actor feels responsible for the outcome. Every decision makes sense in isolation. Together, they create a structure with almost no tolerance for delay. That's the core contradiction. The system that made global trade cheap and reliable did it by removing everything that made it resilient. It traded buffers for speed, redundancy for utilization, flexibility for precision. As long as nothing goes wrong, this looks brilliant. When something does go wrong, the costs don't spread evenly. They fall outward, onto whoever has the least leverage to push back. The system doesn't fail when it's stressed. It reveals who it was built to protect. So when shipping slows and prices rise everywhere, the real issue isn't congestion or weather or bad timing. It's the fact that a system moving nearly everything the world consumes was designed with almost no room for error. And if efficiency requires removing every spare minute, every spare container, every spare route, then the next question is unavoidable. When the system runs out of time again, who gets buffered, and who gets cut loose? To understand why global trade reacts the way it does, you have to stop looking at ships and start looking at rules. Not laws. Rules written into contracts, schedules, software, and pricing models. This is where the system actually lives. Long before a ship leaves port, capacity has already been sold. Space on vessels is allocated months ahead through long-term contracts. Big shippers lock in volume. Smaller ones buy space later, at higher prices, with fewer guarantees. On paper, everyone has access. In practice, access is ranked. Shipping lines don't operate alone. They coordinate through alliances, sharing vessels and routes to keep utilization high. This lowers costs and spreads risk between carriers, but it also synchronizes decisions. When capacity is reduced on one route, alternatives don't suddenly appear. They disappear together. Ports sit at the center of this machine, not as neutral gateways, but as tightly optimized systems. Yard space is limited. Crane time is scheduled. Labor is assigned by the hour. A container arriving outside its window doesn't just arrive late. It falls out of sequence. And once it's out of sequence, everything after it shifts. When congestion builds, the system doesn't pause to recover. It reprioritizes. Containers tied to long-term contracts move first. High-value cargo is unloaded earlier. Others are stacked deeper in the yard, reshuffled again and again, each move adding delay. Time is lost quietly, one adjustment at a time. Inland logistics reacts next. Rail slots are missed. Truck capacity is reassigned. Warehouses delay intake because they're already full. Each actor optimizes locally, responding to their own constraints. No one sees the whole chain. No one needs to. Software replaces conversation. Dashboards replace judgment. If utilization drops, capacity is cut. If congestion rises, prices increase. If risk grows, insurance tightens. These decisions happen automatically, faster than coordination ever could. Speed becomes authority. Money flows through the same logic. When space is scarce, shipping rates spike. Those who can pay move. Those who can't wait. This isn't framed as exclusion. It's framed as market dynamics, as efficiency, as supply and demand. Insurance reinforces the hierarchy. Cargo with higher coverage gets protected. Lower value shipments absorb more risk. Delays translate into higher premiums. Higher premiums translate into fewer options. Over time, uncertainty becomes expensive. Certainty becomes a product. Governments rarely sit inside this machine. They regulate safety, security, emissions. They don't set routing priorities. They don't control pricing. When disruptions hit economies, responses come late, after prices rise and shortages appear. By then, the machine has already adapted. What makes this system hard to see is that no one appears to be doing anything wrong. Every decision can be justified. Costs are minimized. Assets are utilized. Contracts are honored. The damage is spread thinly across thousands of transactions, far from where decisions are made. The system doesn't rely on secrecy. It relies on complexity. Cause and effect are separated by distance and time. A delayed container becomes inflation weeks later. A skipped port becomes a factory slowdown in another country. The links exist, but they're buried in logistics data few people ever read. And every time the system is stressed, it learns. After congestion, priority pricing becomes normal. After volatility, contracts get stricter. Access becomes something you buy, not something you assume.
This is how global shipping shifts from a service into a gate. It doesn't decide what gets produced, but it strongly influences what reaches markets, when, and at what cost.
Those with scale gain predictability. Those without absorb risk. From the outside, it still looks like trade. Ships sail, ports operate, goods arrive. But underneath, the rules have changed. Movement is no longer neutral. It's conditional. And once access is conditional, the question isn't whether the system works. It clearly does. The question is who it works for. Because when every delay triggers a reprioritization, and every reprioritization favors those with leverage, the machine stops being invisible. It becomes selective. So if global trade is governed not by collapse, but by quiet decisions made upstream, what happens when those decisions start shaping entire economies? And when access replaces availability as the real currency, who ends up paying for a system that never technically fails? When global shipping slows, the damage doesn't hit one place. It spreads outward, unevenly, following money, access, and leverage. The same delay looks very different depending on where you stand. In manufacturing hubs, the first sign is silence. Lines don't shut down dramatically. They slow. A factory in Europe waits for a single component that didn't arrive on time. Workers are sent home early. Overtime disappears. Output drops without an announcement. The plant still exists, but it produces less. Across industrial regions, these pauses add up to lost weeks of production, not because demand fell, but because timing broke. In export-heavy countries, the problem looks like accumulation. Containers pile up inland, waiting for space that never opens. Storage fills. Costs rise. For agricultural exporters, delays don't just mean lost revenue. They mean spoilage. Crops that took months to grow are dumped because shipping windows closed. The loss is physical, visible, and rarely recovered. At major transit ports, congestion becomes self-reinforcing. Ships wait offshore. Yard space tightens. Equipment runs continuously. Labor stretches to keep pace. Each attempt to clear backlog increases the risk of the next disruption. The port never stops working, but it operates under constant strain. Recovery becomes temporary, not stable. Import-dependent regions feel the impact last, but often the hardest. In parts of Africa, Latin America, and island economies, delays in shipping translate into shortages of essentials. Medicine arrives late. Food prices jump. Fuel costs spike. These regions have fewer routing alternatives and less bargaining power. When capacity is limited, they move down the priority list. In wealthier consumer markets, the effects appear as inflation. Prices rise unevenly. Some products disappear while others remain. The explanation is always vague. Supply chain issues. Global conditions. The language makes it sound natural, inevitable. Few people see the logistics decisions behind the shelf. Small businesses absorb the shock quietly. They don't have long-term contracts or guaranteed space. When shipping costs multiply, they can't pay to jump the line. They delay orders, reduce inventory, close temporarily. Many don't reopen. Their exit isn't recorded as a system failure. It's treated as market adjustment. Large corporations experience the same disruption differently. They negotiate priority access. They lock in capacity. They spread risk across regions. They pass costs down the chain, one price increase at a time. Volatility strengthens their position by weakening competitors. Stability becomes a competitive advantage they can afford. This uneven impact is not accidental. It's how the system reallocates pressure. When capacity tightens, access replaces availability as the real currency. Those with leverage move. Those without wait. Scarcity becomes a sorting mechanism. The environmental costs compound alongside the economic ones. Ships idle offshore burn fuel without moving goods. Rerouted journeys extend transit times. Emergency air freight fills gaps at much higher emissions. A system built to be efficient becomes inefficient under stress, but the damage remains externalized. Governments respond late and unevenly. Some subsidize shipping costs to stabilize prices. Others release reserves or cap consumer prices temporarily. Investigations are announced. Reports are written. None of these actions change how capacity is allocated or who gets priority next time. They manage symptoms, not structure. What ties these outcomes together is normalization. Disruption becomes routine. Volatility becomes expected. Businesses plan for instability instead of reliability. Consumers adjust expectations downward. The question shifts from why this keeps happening to how quickly everyone can adapt. Over time, this reshapes behavior. Companies overorder when they can, amplifying demand spikes. Ports push throughput harder, delaying maintenance. Shipping lines adjust capacity aggressively, chasing margins. Each adaptation introduces new fragility. The map of consequences reveals a pattern. The further you are from decision-making power, the more exposure you carry. The closer you are to capacity control, the more protection you enjoy. Risk flows downhill. Stability flows upward. Global shipping doesn't collapse when it fails. It redistributes damage. The world experiences this as higher prices, wasted goods, lost jobs, and fragile supply. The system experiences it as feedback, as proof that efficiency still works, as long as someone else pays. And because the effects are scattered across regions and sectors, no single moment forces a reckoning. Each loss looks local. Each delay looks temporary. Together, they form a permanent state of imbalance. If a system can move almost everything the world consumes, yet consistently shift the cost of failure onto those with the least leverage, what does that say about who global trade is really built for? And when disruption becomes the norm instead of the exception, how long can a system like this keep redistributing damage before it has nowhere left to send it? The system never breaks in one place. It reveals itself when too many small failures line up at the same time. At one of the world's busiest shipping corridors, a backlog grows quietly offshore. Dozens of vessels wait, engines idling, burning fuel while schedules slip. Each day at sea costs money. Each hour delayed triggers penalties written deep inside contracts. No one panics. Waiting is cheaper than docking without a slot. On land, the numbers start to bend. Freight rates that once moved gradually now jump in steps. A container that used to cross oceans for a few $1,000s suddenly costs several times more. Not because ships disappeared, but because space became scarce. Companies with long-term contracts keep moving. Everyone else recalculates. In Europe, an automotive supplier shuts down a line because a single part doesn't arrive. Thousands of vehicles wait incomplete, missing components that exist but are stuck in transit. The cost isn't just lost output. It's workers sent home, suppliers unpaid, schedules rewritten. The factory doesn't collapse. It bleeds slowly. In Southeast Asia, exporters watch containers pile up inland. Warehouses fill. Storage fees rise daily. Agricultural goods spoil while waiting for space that never opens. Crops grown over months are discarded in days. The loss is total. The explanation is simple. Missed windows. No priority. In North America, retailers react before shelves go empty. Promotions are canceled. Prices rise quietly. Forecasts are rewritten. Consumers see inflation before they see shortage. A missing shipment becomes a pricing decision, not a logistics headline. In Africa and parts of Latin America, the same delays carry heavier weight. Medicine shipments arrive weeks late. Fuel costs spike after shipping schedules shift. Food prices rise faster than wages. These regions don't control routes or volumes. When capacity tightens, they move down the list. The numbers are uneven, but the pattern is consistent. When shipping slows, costs don't spread evenly. They concentrate. Large corporations absorb increases or pass them on. Smaller firms can't. Some shut down permanently. Their exit never makes the news. It's recorded as market adjustment. Ports try to recover by pushing harder. Cranes run longer hours. Equipment cycles faster. Maintenance is delayed. The goal isn't resilience. It's clearing backlog. Each short-term fix increases long-term risk. Congestion clears, then returns sooner. Shipping lines respond by tightening capacity again. Routes serving lower-margin markets are deprioritized. High-volume corridors recover first. This isn't announced as strategy. It appears as scheduling, as availability, as market conditions. Insurance costs rise alongside risk. Cargo premiums increase. Coverage terms tighten. Lower-value shipments carry more exposure. Delay becomes expensive. Certainty becomes something you buy. Governments step in late. Strategic reserves are released. Subsidies are offered. Price controls are discussed. None of this changes who controls space on ships or which cargo moves first. By the time policies take effect, contracts are already signed months ahead. What makes this the climax isn't scale. It's convergence. Every actor is behaving rationally. Ports optimize throughput. Shipping lines protect margins. Corporations secure access. Governments manage fallout. No one declares failure. No one shuts the system down. And yet, the costs accumulate everywhere at once. Lost production, wasted goods, higher prices, weaker competitors, stronger gatekeepers. This is where the system shows its true shape, not as infrastructure but as a filter. When capacity is limited, it doesn't ask what society needs most. It asks what protects profitability, contracts, and future leverage. You can see it in the data. After every major disruption, concentration increases. Fewer players control more capacity. Priority access becomes formalized. Volatility stops being an exception and becomes a feature smaller actors are expected to manage. The climax doesn't arrive as a crash. It arrives as alignment. Shipping lines, ports, insurers, and major shippers adjust in the same direction. Toward tighter control. Toward paid certainty. Toward selective stability. The world keeps moving, but not evenly. By the time the visible disruption fades, the structure underneath has already changed. New contracts lock in advantage. New pricing resets expectations. The system emerges smaller, tighter, and less forgiving. From the outside, it looks like recovery. From inside, it's consolidation. This is the moment where global shipping stops being a neutral background and becomes an active force shaping winners and losers. Not by breaking rules, by following them perfectly. And because the system survives every shock without collapsing, it teaches everyone the same lesson. You don't need resilience if you can transfer risk fast enough. That lesson doesn't end when ships start moving again. It stays embedded in how the next crisis will be handled. So when trade slows the next time, and it will, the question won't be whether the system can handle it. It already has. The real question is who it will protect this time, and who will be told to wait. What finally collapses is not the system. It's the expectation that things will ever go back to normal. After every disruption, the headlines fade first. Ports clear their backlogs. Ships leave anchorage. Schedules look stable again. On paper, trade recovers. But the system doesn't reset. It locks in what it learned. Shipping contracts become longer and stricter. Priority access gets formalized. Companies that survive the disruption secure guaranteed space for the next one. Those that didn't are gone. Their absence creates the illusion of balance. This is how instability becomes permanent. Ports expand vertically instead of building resilience. Containers stack higher. Equipment runs closer to its limits. Maintenance is postponed to keep volume moving. The port looks busier than ever, but it's operating with less margin than before. Shipping lines consolidate capacity. Alliances tighten coordination. Fewer routes serve more cargo. On major corridors, a small number of players control the majority of available space. Competition exists, but only within boundaries that protect utilization and pricing power. For manufacturers, planning changes permanently. Instead of asking how to produce efficiently, they ask how to secure movement. Supply chains shorten or fragment. Product lines are simplified. Suppliers are cut to those who can deliver reliably under unstable conditions. Flexibility gives way to control. Workers experience the shift differently. Hours become irregular. Employment becomes conditional. Entire segments of labor turn into shock absorbers. When demand spikes, they are pulled in. When shipping slows, they are released quietly. The system records this as efficiency. Communities experience it as erosion. Consumers adjust expectations downward. Price volatility becomes normal. Availability becomes uncertain. Buying behavior changes. People stockpile when they can, reinforcing demand spikes. Shortages feel sudden, but they are the result of anticipation, not panic. Governments adapt too. Instead of preventing disruption, they plan for it. Strategic reserves become permanent tools. Emergency measures turn routine. Policy focuses on cushioning impact, not changing structure. The cost is absorbed through budgets, inflation, and debt. Environmentally, the system drifts further from its original promise. Ships idle more often. Rerouted journeys lengthen distances. Air freight fills urgent gaps at vastly higher emissions. Efficiency no longer means lower impact. It means faster response to volatility. None of this is labeled failure. The system keeps functioning. Goods still move. Trade continues. What disappears is predictability. Stability becomes something negotiated, not assumed. This is the quiet collapse. Not a breakdown of infrastructure, but a breakdown of balance. A shift from resilience to selectivity. From redundancy to dependence. From shared stability to private access. The world adapts because it has to. Businesses pay more to secure certainty. Smaller players accept worse terms or exit. Regions with less leverage absorb longer delays and higher prices. The system doesn't force this outcome. It rewards it. And because nothing dramatic marks this transition, it's hard to challenge. There is no single moment to point to. No clear villain. No obvious fix. Each change looks reasonable. Each adjustment feels necessary. Over time, the idea of global trade as neutral infrastructure fades. It becomes clear that movement itself has become a privilege. Something allocated, priced, and protected. The ships never stop sailing. That's why the collapse is easy to miss. The system survives by narrowing participation, not by becoming stronger. It works best for those who can plan months ahead, commit volume, and absorb shocks. Everyone else lives closer to the edge. And once instability becomes normal, recovery loses its meaning. So if global shipping can survive constant disruption without ever breaking, the question isn't whether it's resilient enough. It clearly isn't designed to be. The real question is how long a system can keep functioning when the cost of staying normal keeps getting pushed onto the same people, in the same places, every time. And if this is what stability looks like now, what exactly are we preparing for the next time the system slows down? At the beginning, this was about ships you never see. Steel boxes crossing oceans. Schedules buried inside software. Decisions made far from where their consequences land. That picture hasn't changed. What has changed is how exposed everything around it has become. Today, more than 90% of global trade still moves by sea. Around 50,000 cargo vessels are sailing at any given moment. On the surface, the system looks alive and active. And yet, when shipping slows, the effects show up in very real places. Factories in Europe pause production because a single part is late. Farmers in exporting countries dump crops because containers miss their window. Retailers in the US raise prices weeks before shelves go empty. In parts of Africa and island economies, delays translate directly into shortages of medicine, food, and fuel. None of this happens because goods stop existing. It happens because access shifts. When capacity tightens, freight costs don't rise evenly. They spike. A route that once cost thousands suddenly costs several times more. Large companies pay and keep moving. Smaller ones wait. Some don't survive the wait. After each disruption, fewer players control more space, and priority access becomes something you secure in advance, not something you assume. Governments step in after the damage is visible. Reserves are released. Subsidies are offered. Price controls are discussed. These actions soften the impact, but they don't change how space on ships is allocated or who moves first next time. By then, Contracts are already signed months ahead. Environmentally, the picture gets darker. Ships idle offshore burning fuel while waiting for a berth. Emergency rerouting extends journeys. Air freight fills urgent gaps at far higher emissions. A system built for efficiency becomes less efficient under stress, but the cost stays out of sight. And slowly, people adapt. Businesses plan for volatility instead of reliability. Consumers expect higher prices and fewer choices. Instability becomes normal. Not because it's unavoidable, but because the system keeps functioning just enough to avoid a reckoning. Which brings us back to those ships you never see. They are still moving. Trade is still flowing. Shelves still refill, unevenly. The world doesn't stop when global shipping slows. It just reveals who gets buffered and who gets exposed. Who can buy certainty, and who absorbs delay as a fact of life. So the next time a product disappears, or prices rise without warning, the question isn't what went wrong this time. It's this: in a system that moves almost everything the world depends on, with almost no room for error, who was it really designed to protect when time runs out? And once you notice how often the same people are asked to wait, it becomes hard to believe that this is just coincidence.